And Representative Bear, I'm sure, will be here. Everybody's kind of got different work. That's part of in-session committee meetings. So, okay, very good. Really appreciate everyone here coming back. And we want to complete this work maybe within the next hour. We have a rules committee meeting at 4 o'clock with a couple members, so we'd like to do that. And so if we could just fill these seats up with more public testimony, we'd love to hear from anybody here. And do we have folks that have come back online? We had 3 this morning. We have those 3 back. Very good. Okay, so if we can fill those seats, and I'm sorry we kind of cut in line, but you were next. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ann Clement. I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Our chapter represents the 10,000 estimated people that are living with dementia here in Wyoming, in addition to the 16,000 unpaid family caregivers that provide daily care for them. And I'm sure you can imagine that within that first year of a dementia diagnosis, a suicide rate is increased, but to the extent that it's 54% of patients that are given a diagnosis of dementia will attempt suicide within that first year of diagnosis. And for their caregivers, they have a 31% increased risk of also attempting suicide. So as we had discussed earlier, some of those lack of resources that exist across our state because of the distances between providers, having a hotline that would be available for someone to make a call could absolutely be the difference between their choice to whether or not to take that attempt. So I recognize that this is a funding request that's a burden for the state, but we do sincerely appreciate the consideration of this committee for that continued service for the community safety net that extends in between those spaces where we do have providers and where we don't. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Any questions? Ms. Clement, well, thank you, and you'll stay here in case we need to have further questions. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Deacon, welcome. If any other folks plan on testifying, please fill the seats. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mike Lehman. I represent the Catholic Diocese of Cheyenne, which represents the Catholics around the state of Wyoming. I came this morning to just simply say we support the bill. Didn't really have anything else to say besides that. And then I started thinking as some of the questions came about as far as other particular programs that are out there, and I thought I would just share briefly a program that I recently kind of came across. I was contacted by a doctor up in Teton County. She has a program called Veterans Talking to Veterans, recognizing the suicide rate among Wyoming veterans, and she wanted to do something. She has this program. And she contacted me just to see if, because we have Catholic parishes around the state, if we would be willing to provide a space for these veteran facilitators to come in and do this program. And so my parish, Holy Trinity here in Cheyenne, we kind of piloted it for here, for the diocese. Catholic Charities of Wyoming has endorsed the program as well as you'll see in the email I sent to all of you that Governor Gordon has endorsed it as well. As a vet, I kind of was just there to help this get started. And then I discovered that I was benefiting from the program itself. It's really a powerful program. Probably not something that our hotline would refer folks to when they're in that position, but it is an example of a growing sort of need, a recognition of a need from the ground level to reach out and help folks. And we do still think there is that need for that downstream support as well. And so with that, I would just close and stand for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Deacon. Appreciate your service. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Lehman? Okay, thank you. And you'll be here in case members want to call you back up. Question, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Lehman. Appreciate your testimony. Are you aware that the Biden administration has they're bringing 18-fold the financing that they had for the 988 program? It's moved from 24 million to 432 million. So it sounds like it's going to be a really robust system. So I don't think we're going to lose that. In your mind, does that still make it capable to work with your program?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Bear. I was not aware of that, how that will impact the program. I know this is, I know this particular program benefits a lot because once the veterans experience it, many of them want to receive the training, become facilitators themselves. They then volunteer. All of the work, like the one that's happening in my parish, that's a volunteer vet that's coming up to do it. I think the cost comes in as far as training folks and how that will impact that. I don't know, but
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Lehman. Go ahead, we'll start. Go ahead. Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman and committee, my name is Kathy Ide, and I live in Casper. I wish my husband was here beside me today, but he's upstairs in the Senate. I've never publicly spoken about the death of my son, Mark, and who lost his life. He took his life. And I know that some of you can relate. You still count the 5 years and the 4 months and the 6 days and tomorrow 7 days. And it's a hard life to live. But I'm not up here, for sympathy and that type of thing. And I think that my thoughts on this bill will probably surprise many of you, but I'm speaking in opposition to this House bill. And I didn't know about this meeting until just a couple hours ago. So I just scribbled some notes, so you'll have to bear with me so I can just maintain composure. I do not have any data or statistics to go along with my feelings and my thoughts and beliefs. And I know that probably some of the things I will say will offend many of the people here in this room. And my comments don't come without sensitivity to others who have lost their children or their loved ones as well. It's been many years, and as we look back on Mark's last years, his last days, and his last minutes that we had with him, I've had quite a bit of time to just to search for an answer. But there's only there's one thing that stood out to me as I've thought about those memories, is that the loss of hope that must have, occurred in his heart. And I know that some of you are Christians as well. And I look back to Proverbs 13:12. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. So obviously his heart had lost its hope. I believe that it's clearly evident that the issue of suicide is spiritual in nature. If a family that loves a child more than anything, and you can't describe it, if you are not able to save your child, then how can you possibly believe that a government program can? No state agency can heal a broken, wounded spirit. Just look at the many failed government program after failed government program. You can look at the war on drugs. You can look at federal education. You can look at Department of Family Services. It's readily apparent that government can never be the solution to issues of the heart or suicide for that matter. I had read this quote he's passed away, his name is Rabbi Sacks. I guess he was someone that the Jewish community revered. And he said, God is God, humanity is humanity. There can be no blurring of the boundaries. And I would substitute that God is God and government is government. There can be no blurring of the boundaries. Despite the good intentions of those who drafted this legislation, it's evident to me that suicide cannot be prevented by a government program. I don't know what the answer is to prevent a loved one from taking their life. But part of the answer lies with you and with me, opening our hearts, our eyes, our ears, with spirits open to God's promptings and love. It would be far better for a private, faith-based organization to lead these efforts to prevent more precious lives from being lost to suicide. With that, I urge you to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you being here. Members, any questions? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your heartfelt testimony, and I think you know that I'm with you.
I know.
You mentioned that you don't feel that government is the solution, that faith-based programs are the solution. I think it comes down to your testimony about hope. Do you feel that there's anything that the government can provide hope for these people?
No, like
Go
that
ahead.
rabbi said, you know, government is government. It's not spiritual in nature. I mean, we, as part of being active in government, can lead, you know, our virtuous lives and things like that. I believe that it's part of, that's what would make a good government. But I don't believe that a hotline that's administered by government employees is going to be effective. I think it would be far better to be in a private sector or a private or a charitable organization or something of that nature.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Okay, thank you for being here today. Okay, who's next? Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jason Hendricks. I'm with Range. We're a telecommunications company in a number of areas of the state. My testimony is pretty simple. Just wanted to say that we're supportive of the bill and the funding mechanism in it, and that we as telecommunications companies have done what we can in our portion of the system to make sure that this system operates. Specifically, we had to do some coding to make sure that people can dial 988. Beyond that, and where it goes from there, I'm not prepared to answer any technical questions on that and that part of the network. But on our part of the network, we've done what we can. And I just like, you know, just as far as some of the other funding mechanisms that were considered, I think that this is the better way to go rather than, for example, a surcharge where only some of the customers pay for it and causes a lot of disturbance in the market with those. So I prefer this approach, and with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you for being here. We have a question, Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Would I be correct that the 988 system is just like the 911 system and that it immediately could locate where that call is coming from and pinpoint it on the system?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer, that unfortunately I can't answer. I don't know what happens on the location capability of that.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony. Go ahead. Next, Mr. Garrett. And go ahead and just fill these seats. If anybody else wants to testify, go ahead, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you, Mrs. Ide, for your heartfelt and incredibly moving comments. Like you, my parents lost a daughter to suicide. I lost a sister to suicide on April 11th, 1995. It was devastating. It is devastating. Mrs. Ide has shown you all that, if you didn't know that already. My sister worked in mental health counseling, believe it or not, and at times tried to help people through periods in their lives when they might have been vulnerable to suicide. And yet she herself succumbed. My sister worked in Wyoming, and like we all do, she was doing her best to look out for her neighbors. I think this bill is one that helps us all better look out for our neighbors. And that's why I support the bill. One of my favorite prayers growing up in church was the birthday prayer. And it starts out asking God to watch over a child as their days increase. We say that prayer for my sister every November 13th, even though she's no longer with us. Her days are still increasing, wherever she may be. And we pray that she stay unspotted from the world. And we pray that God strengthen her when she stands. And we wish she could have been comforted when she was discouraged and sorrowful. But she remains in our hearts, and I think that she would very much support this bill too. And so for those reasons, I thank you for your consideration of the bill, and I'll certainly be here to answer any questions as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Garrett. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman,
And,
I'm sorry, I didn't get the testifier's name.
Just one, please
Yes, sir.
introduce. for sure.
I beg your pardon, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. Richard Garrett,
Okay,
I'm a resident of Cheyenne.
thank you, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Garrett? Okay, thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony. Representative Alaman.
Bill Alaman from Midwest. This is a hard one, guys. A couple years ago, 2 years ago at Christmas, my niece lives with me at Christmas, and she brought a little girl home with her from work. I became very good friends with this little girl. 2 weeks later, after Christmas, while talking to my niece, her very best friend, she took her life while on the phone. I don't see how this bill is going to help us. It's going to cost us money that I would like, if I thought it would help one little bit, I would say, yeah, let's double it. Folks, I don't think it will, because when little Amanda, she's tore up to this day, and I am a little. I really liked the little girl. And they had spent 2 weeks with me, and I just cannot understand. She was on the phone to her very, very best friend. And it was while she was on the phone, she took her life. I thank you very much.
Well,
Any
thank
questions?
you for your testimony. Any questions, Representative? Appreciate you being here. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Simoneau. I represent the Wyoming Counseling Association. Before I begin, for the sake of confusion, I was one of the numbers online, and now I have magically appeared before you. And so just in case, we're worried that we lost someone earlier today. I first would like to thank the committee for taking this up as an interim topic, as well as taking it up after adjournment, as a lot of work has gone into this bill. And I am very glad to see it be taken seriously. It's been a wonderful opportunity to work with WAMSAC, as well as the other stakeholders in this room, on this legislation. If you will humor me, I would like to address some questions and concerns that have been brought up this morning by talking about a recent experience I had. I was given the opportunity to participate in a ride-along with an officer in the Casper Police Department. I witnessed not just the important role that law enforcement serves in our community, but also the irreplaceable role that 911 and dispatch plays in public service. Through technology, innovation, and a lot of on-the-job experience, the city of Casper has been able to build an effective assessment and communication system overseen by a communication center located in the area. While in the car, I was able to hear dispatch coordinate police service, sheriffs, deputies, fire department, detention center staff, hospitals, EMS services, as well as the morgue. They are critical in knowing which services are needed for each call, which services are available, and who may be serving other residents. Without 911 and local dispatch services, our local rescue service residents would suffer. Since 2008, when President Bush signed the Federal Mental Health Parity Act, there has been a push on federal, state, and local levels to build up similar infrastructure for mental health services that already exist for medical personnel and law enforcement. Part of that push has been mobile crisis services, mental health emergency rooms and urgent cares, mental health first aid certifications for community members, as well as a movement for a national 988 lifeline to direct those in crisis to these services. I want to echo the reasons that were highlighted this morning for funding this lifeline, along with the fact that the 988 bill was signed into federal law by President Trump 26 months ago. It established a service that is expected to be nationwide, and that our residents will call or text in order to engage in that feature. Other states' data has shown that the text feature is primarily used by adolescents and young adults. In the same way that local dispatch is able to mobilize law enforcement and medical personnel for rescue emergencies, we are confident that having a consistently well-funded 988 lifeline within Wyoming's borders will do the same. Since launching the 988 lifeline in July, initial numbers suggest that that hypothesis will be correct, and we've experienced increase in calling and increase in active lives rescues. Forgive me. We would not want to call someone in Colorado for an ambulance if we were in cardiac arrest. Wyoming residents shouldn't be asked to call someone out of state when they are experiencing something equivalent with their mental health. Which brings us all here today. Today, we have a wide variety of stakeholders advocating for this because we are seeing how the lack of mental health infrastructure is impacting their communities, their businesses, and their industries. I cannot recall the last time a bill has united so many different stakeholders like this. Over the years, we have drafted bills to fund crisis, mental health, and substance use through Medicaid expansion, through general funds, through taxing beer, through possibly taxing medical marijuana if it was legalized, and also through taxing phone lines. Yet this is the bill which united so many stakeholders, partly because of the cause, for sure, but also because of the nature of the funding mechanism of this bill. $46 million is a small investment into a trust which will help prevent costly inpatient hospital services, loss of potential income, loss of life, and loss of families. I do ask that you pass the bill, and I do stand for question. Before I go silent, I also want to highlight that a lot of what mental health is built on in its foundation and its ethics is to recommend faith-based services when appropriate. Similar to our medical personnel, if you are wanting to go to a Catholic-based hospital or you are wanting to talk to a Christian chaplain when you arrive there, it is within the ethics of the mental health professional to make sure that those faith-based services are provided for you. An absence of or a presence of a government infrastructure does not necessarily mean the absence of faith-based services, and that's something I wanted to highlight today because I do recognize how important it is in nature. And with that, I stand for question.
Okay, any questions? Representative Zwanitzer?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Lindsay. I'm trying to figure out, is there an affirmative duty to provide care? They call 988 and they say something to the effect of, I've just taken some pills and I'm ending it. Is there a duty on that operator to send services to that person, even if they request not to happen?
Correct.
Semino? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swanser, forgive me, this is my first testimony of the season, and yes, that is correct. That is part of the protocol.
And then a quick follow-up. Do you know for sure, as I assume, but they do geolocate your phone and where you are, and if they refuse to tell them? Or if somebody would answer that for me at some point.
Can you, Ms. Somerville, can you come on up and help us? We've had that question for a few hours now, I think, and we want to get an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Swanser. So at the current moment, no. Right now, those calls come in. They are routed by the National Lifeline based on area code. However, the FCC is working on that. We expect that to come into fruition with the next few years to add that geolocation feature to 988.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Okay, any questions might as well stay there for a minute. Any other questions on this? Okay, appreciate your testimony. Appreciate you coming in person. So thank you so much. Oh, you have a question?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Through the chairman, yeah. Go ahead.
you might be the right person for this question. I'm not sure, and so I will apologize if I get the wrong person. But I had noticed that same discussion of the fact that the funding was increased here recently. Can you talk to that at all in terms of those additional dollars that have been, the current administration has added in the last year? What access do you have to those dollars? And I might ask a follow-up question, but let me stop there to see if that's.
Ms. Somerville? You-
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke. So I can speak to that, to the knowledge that we have right now. So there was an increase in the FY22 federal budget. What we don't quite know well enough is how much Wyoming will be eligible for. In the last 988 funding allocation, Wyoming was eligible for the minimum amount that was set there, and that was only $250,000. So there's quite a bit of math and population data and things that go into that. What we also don't know is how much of that can be actually used for provision of services versus implementation or potentially starting to plan for geolocation or infrastructure or training or other things. So we don't have those details yet. The last thing that I would add to that is right now this is one-time money. So there's no guarantee that it's going to come, that we'll get another appropriation the next year.
Follow?
Thank you,
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And so a follow-up to that specific question. So at this point, we don't know how that money's going to shake out, right? So that's where that one's at. And it's one-time money. Quick kind of follow-up to that. What other money in terms of grants and those kinds of things are out there? I know I have seen snippets of information that there are some. I'm not sure I know the whole amount of those. I don't really have that nailed down, but and of those grants, do you have access to those? Have we attempted to reach out and use those grants as well?
Go ahead, Ms. Somerville.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, so I'm going to cut that into two pieces. One is in terms of the individual centers. So both of these call centers are individual nonprofit entities. And so they work to try to bring grants and philanthropy to support those services. That's what they've been doing the last couple of years, just to try to build up that service. I have every imagination that they're going to continue to do that, but they're relatively small dollar grants. 20,000 here or 40,000 here. They're not large operational grants. To the second part, I want to talk about state funding, like where we might be able, or state access to other grant funds. The two that are mentioned in the 988 planning book and are shared with states are the SOR, so the state opioid response grants. Particular to that one, we are in the final year. Congress has not reauthorized that program. Currently, all of that money is allocated and is out in the communities providing medication-assisted therapy treatment and services, outpatient-based services to treat opioid disorder. The second one that is mentioned frequently is the mental health block grant. So as the state of Wyoming, we receive a block grant on a yearly basis to help provide some of these services. Currently, the majority of that block grant is utilized in the community mental health system. So we use state dollars to match that block grant to make the maintenance of effort. That money right now is being spent on mental health outpatient residential services, and that includes crisis stabilization services. There is a requirement in that mental health block grant to provide, I believe 5% of that funds has to go to crisis services. Right now, the Department of Health has allocated that to those crisis stabilization services. But those are the funding streams that are out there and that are kind of mentioned to states for planning purposes.
Okay, very good. Any follow-up?
Can I ask a
Yeah,
follow-up?
For sure.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful for me. And so in association with kind of the previous legislation for the enhancement of the mental health process, I know that's been going on much longer. Okay. Have we or do we have a crisis management process for that, a call center, those kinds of things for the mental health processes that have been going on for some time? Is there any other call center like that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, so the general answer is nothing like 988. So I believe what you're referring to is behavioral health reform that has been going on for several years. That is related to the community mental health system. It establishes a priority population. Certainly, part of our charge in community mental health is people in crisis. So what that really entails is the last two of those, potentially mobile crisis, which doesn't really exist in Wyoming yet, as was mentioned this morning. That is in the beginning stages. We have a community mental health center that is pursuing the first CCBHC. That's being built. It's not there yet. And the second piece is crisis stabilization. As kind of that continuum of crisis care, we do the crisis stabilization. We have 4 crisis stabilization facilities. So currently, each center operates a 24/7 response. You can call the center, you get the on-call person. They can, work with law enforcement and stakeholders. There is no statewide line. I will also mention, there have been, and it still exists to this day, some community lines that have popped up in specific communities that are trying to work with stuff or stuff tied to educational institutions. Again, that's very limited in scope, where this is statewide access to the entire mental health system resources.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay,
thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
okay, very good. Okay, any other, and you'll still be here for any questions. Is there anyone else in the room would like to provide public comment? Okay, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I had a couple of
Go
thoughts
ahead and, please
and
introduce yourself and where you're from. And
my name is Rob Hendry.
we all have to knock the dust off a little bit.
That's
First
exactly
meeting.
right.
Yeah.
My name is Rob Hendry and I'm the vice chairman of the Wyoming Business Alliance and the Heritage Foundation. I'm a rancher west of Casper. I'm a contractor and an ex-county commissioner. A couple of thoughts this morning while I was listening. As far as funding this thing, it's been mentioned a couple of different ways, but we have a trust fund that we set up for wildlife in this state. So why can't we set up a trust fund for people in crisis? It makes sense. It really does. And another thought, the 911, I'll bet went through the same growing pains when it started. And so after a while, a 911 is just, you dial 911 now. So it's automatic. And I think over time, this would be automatic too. If they feel like they need it, they can dial it. I think that would be very important. But another thing I thought about this morning was, build it and they will come. And if you set it up and get it going, it may need a little tweaking. So if it needs tweaking, you'll tweak it. But that's all I had, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, well, appreciate you being here and sticking around. Any questions, Mr. Henry? Okay,
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate you.
Chairman.
Thank you. Any other members of the public here, folks would like to? Okay, is there anyone online?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we do have 4 people online with their hands up. I'll admit the first 2.
Bring them in and we'll welcome them. Take their testimony here.
Mr. Chairman, I've admitted former Representative Sweeney and Donna Burkholz.
Okay, we'll go with Representative Sweeney first. We can see you, Representative Sweeney.
Sorry, I still got my House chamber picture up. Apologize for that, Mr. Chairman. I had tried to testify this morning, but obviously continued. Thanks for the continuation. I just feel so strongly that this is our best opportunity is to set up this basically endowment or trust fund and for long-term sustainable funding for this very critical piece, as you heard this morning, committee, of the puzzle. And I was involved with Central Wyoming Counseling Center on trying to get that program set up and going, which is a critical piece, and the continuation of that through the ARPA funds. I urge you strongly to support this. You may not believe this is the right way to go, but frankly, honestly, our nonprofits are stretched. Our churches are stressed beyond belief. So to believe that there isn't a role for government in this particular area, I believe just the opposite. Our churches can't do it alone. And our nonprofits can't do it alone. And it's going to take all of us, all those pieces. I lost my brother about 21 years ago now. And there isn't a day that goes by, and I've lost several dear friends also to this insidious creature we have, is especially bad in Wyoming. But I urge you, and I apologize again, Mr. Chairman, for my background. I'll get that taken down as soon as I get off camera. So thank you, committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for listening.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sweeney, and members. Any questions of former Representative Sweeney? And it is the People's House. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's okay. And he has disappeared, so no questions. Okay, next, who do we have? Can you introduce yourself and where you're from?
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman Hirschman and members of the committee. My name is Donna Burkholz, and I live in Sheridan, and I am a member of the Wyoming chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Board. And I'm here to speak in favor of the passage of this bill. I realized this morning that we're approaching the 10-year anniversary of the death of my friend Amy, who was when I was a young professional just starting out in my career, she taught me how to be a good mentor. She was incredible at anticipating what people needed and reaching out to you before you had a question and really helping people feel welcomed and a part of the group and empowering you to become a better professional and also a better person. She was active in her church. She went on to become a mom, and when she and her husband had their third baby, they already knew that she struggled with mental health following birth. And when she entered her crisis, they were not able to get her help. And she lost her life, and her 3 little boys lost their mom, and her husband lost his wife. And it was a preventable death. This was before 988 had been established, obviously. And it was before as many resources were available. And her death really helped me realize how important it is for us to have the resources available to help people when they enter crisis. She did not have to die. So, and we still need her today. We appreciate the fact that the legislature has put together the funding to be able to maintain 24/7 Lifeline call centers for people. That is saving lives, I feel certain. The data shows that it works to de-escalate at something like 98% of the calls that come in. They're able to work the person down from the crisis and not have to go further and start directing them towards resources. The 988 number is especially helpful because when you are in the middle of a mental health crisis, trying to remember a long phone number is difficult, but you or your friend or your family member can remember 988 and call. So we expect, and it's being borne out by the numbers, that more people will reach out for help faster because they've got just a 3-digit number to remember. The problem, of course, is that we need consistent funding. And one thing that we also know is that people who have entered a mental health crisis, it's more likely when they're in a time of an economic stress. So when does our legislature need to start cutting funding for services? It's at the times that we have economic stress. That's the very time that people need help more around our state. So I applaud the foresight of the interim committee in deciding to establish a trust fund, because that helps buffer the money that would be available to help the 988 funding, because we would have it in place through good times and bad. And that's just tremendous foresight on the part of the interim committee. And I really think it's a good idea. It establishes the baseline that we need to be able to provide that service to people. In addition, before I conclude, I would like to specifically address a question that Representative Locke had this morning. Representative Locke wanted to know about grassroots groups and what they're doing around the state towards suicide prevention. And I think I can speak to that as a member of one of those grassroots groups. We have all over the state small community suicide prevention groups that have unfortunately often sprung up following the death of a community member. And each of those groups is working hard to address the need in their own community. And they're working together with the other groups as much as possible and sharing resources, sharing ideas, sharing fundraising ideas, and doing what they can to try to make a difference. And we're working so hard, but we need help. Obviously, with Wyoming as the #1 per capita suicide death rate state in the nation, we need more than we're getting. And so what we're asking today is that the legislature really pass this bill and begin working more towards strengthening 988 in the state of Wyoming so that it can become more effective. Those are my comments. If there are any questions.
Okay, Ms. Burkholz, appreciate you joining us from Sheridan. Members, any questions? Okay, none at this point, so thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I just admitted Elizabeth Dole Izzo, I believe is the name. And I have one more I'm going to admit. I'll just admit all of them.
Go ahead, that'd be great. Elizabeth, I think there she is. Can you begin and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and who you represent? Thank you.
Yes, sir. My name is Elizabeth Dole Izzo. I am currently the executive director of the Association of Social Workers for the Wyoming chapter. I have a lot of experience, unfortunately, with the topic we're talking about today, both professionally and personally. Prior to becoming the executive director of NASW, I was a psychiatric evaluator in the Cheyenne Regional Emergency Room. I'm also a veteran. I am the wife of a veteran. I grew up in a military family, to include my mother, father, grandfather, all of my uncles, one of my aunts, cousins, and now we have 2 other members of our family who are actively serving, my niece and my nephew. In 2020, we experienced the death of my uncle, who was, who was an Air Force pilot living in rural Nebraska, which is affected as the same thing as folks here in Wyoming with being rural and isolated. The National Association of Social Workers in Wyoming wholeheartedly stand in support of this bill. Lots of folks have talked about things like our geography and our resources and how unique we are. I also want to talk about how unique we are within the culture. When I started off in human services, I also worked a crisis line in rural Oklahoma. And I was very much aware that when somebody calls into a crisis line, one of the things that I need to do as the first responder on the phone is to establish rapport and understanding with that person in crisis so that we can keep them on the phone until they can de-escalate and we can get help to them. Somebody said earlier about, I was very concerned when I heard that if we do not adopt and support 988 in a sustained manner, that those calls could go to other states. I grew up in Colorado. I went to school in Fort Collins, and respectfully, I didn't know a thing about the Wyoming culture until I moved here in 2006. Being able to connect with that person on the phone, understand the culture that we live in is critical to save that person's life. The other thing I'd like to talk about is my 20 years as a social worker. One of the most frustrating things that I, as a social worker, have had to navigate with my clients is the resources that consistently disappear. I cannot tell you how many times we have had great programs that were grant funded or temporarily funded or inconsistently funded. And I give that resource to a client, and now they're on a wild goose chase because that agency or that program is no longer there. Providing a trust fund for stable, consistent funding for probably the most important life-saving program that we can do in this state is not only prudent, it's compassionate, and it helps it helps us to keep our neighbors, our families, our friends, our veterans, our first responders, our children, and our adolescents safe. Thank you for letting me speak, and I will stand for any questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Dolizo. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your service. And members, do we have any questions? Okay, and we again appreciate you. No questions at this time from the committee, but appreciate your testimony. We have a member that has to go to a rules committee. Is you're going to leave a proxy, I think, if that'd be fine. So if you see a member get up and leave, that's what's going on. So we got other committees working as well. Okay, next I can't see that far, but who is next?
I also admitted Barbara Ann Green.
Miss Andreen, you are next. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, Chairman and Committee. Thank you so much. It's going to take a minute to tell you about myself. I'm from Basin. And in addition to being a reporter for the Bighorn County newspapers, I'm also on the Wyoming Lifeline Board, the State Park Commissioner, the Library Board, Camp Bethel Youth Camp, and Outdoor Recreation Collaborative, and that is not all of them. So I'm coming to you with my experience with all the different things. As the daughter of a 36 and a half year career Navy man, I have seen firsthand the toll on our veterans. And as a Master Chief Hospital Corpsman, my dad served in Korea and Vietnam. And I believe our Wyoming veterans have earned a Wyoming-based 988 suicide prevention hotline. As the granddaughter of a Wyoming Baptist preacher who has spent many hours with the families of those who lost someone to suicide, a 24-hour prevention hotline based in Wyoming could have made a difference. As a newspaper reporter, we've had way too many obits of our youth that appear in our newspaper from suicide, and it could have made a difference. And I'll tell you why I know it could have made a difference. Because I've written editorials about suicide hotlines, and I have had people come up to me and say, thank you. I use that hotline and I'm here talking to you today because I did. And one of those was a veteran. And the hotlines aren't run by governments. I know that that was mentioned earlier. And as a Christian, as a preacher's granddaughter, and in a youth Christian camp, I don't believe that our churches are the ones that can take it on. The government line is not true because the people that are answering the line are trained individuals that are not workers from the government. So I just want to mention to you that those of you on this committee today have the opportunity to save lives. And I hope that you'll take that understanding. And somebody else, like one of your committee members, I have to run because I have a library board meeting. So thank you so much for taking the time and for listening.
Hey, thank you for attending and your testimony. Any questions, members? Okay, thank you so much.
And then the
Okay,
last one,
next,
Karen Sylvester.
Ms. Sylvester, please introduce yourself and where you're from and who you represent.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Sylvester, and I am with the Wyoming Lifeline, headquartered in Grable, Wyoming. I come to you today in favor of this bill so that we can continue the work that we have been diligently working to do for the last 10 years to get Lifeline set up in the state of Wyoming. I think more than anything, after everything you guys have heard today, I don't really think I can offer a lot more in testimony except to maybe answer you guys, if you guys have some more questions, to answer some of your questions about the Lifeline. So I stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, members. Any questions? Ms. Sylvester, who runs the Lifeline in Grable. Go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Ms. Sylvester. Since you're part of the organization that it sounds like you answer these types of calls, can you share with the committee if there's location-specific information that's used when you're walking someone off the ledge, if you will, for a suicide hotline answered call?
Chairman Harshman, Representative Bear, how we at the Wyoming Lifeline, how we handle a call when it comes in, we first establish rapport with somebody and gauge where we think they are according to if it's imminent risk, do we need to call out for emergency services immediately? If not, and fortunately, most of our calls, we are able to de-escalate in that phone call. We offer them resources where they're located. And say they're in a little town in Grable, Wyoming, and they say, I don't want to use services in Grable, Wyoming. I don't feel comfortable using those services. Everybody will know me. We will then immediately offer and say, well, would you like to go to Worland? Would you like to go to Thermopolis? Where will you feel comfortable going? And what kind of resources could we offer you from that area? And so we have a very robust resource list for the state of Wyoming. When we opened up our call center, we would not take calls from a county until we had at least 8 resources on that list to give the people if they called or in the area around us. So we were very methodical and strategic in our setup to make sure that we would have resources, because we know that the worst thing that we could do is to be able to give somebody nothing, and that would only make their problem worse.
Follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sylvester, earlier in the program, there were only 20 hours covered by the Wyoming hotline, and then there were 4 hours covered by the national hotline. The information that you mentioned about local resources, was that information shared with the national hotline so that during that 4-hour period, they could share that information with the caller?
Ms. Sylvester?
Chairman Harshman, Representative Bear, no. The national hotline has their own database where they pull their resources from. Unfortunately, in several of our small communities, they really don't have any resources for them. In establishing the call centers in Wyoming, each of us established our own resource list because we were doing it all volunteer and all on our own. And so everybody had their own. We are now melding those together for the state of Wyoming. The Wyoming Lifeline has gone into a partnership with 211, and we are going to have our resources listed with 211. We will be able to pull all of their resources also when we are on a phone call.
Okay, any other questions, members? I think we really appreciate, I see no further questions from the committee, and appreciate you joining us today and the work you're doing. Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else online? I think we've exhausted public comment here, or is there anyone here that would like to comment on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close public comment. And generally, when we close comment, we'll just work this bill, but we do have an opportunity. If there's a question, we could call on you. So if you're still here, you're not off the hook yet, Ms. Somerville in particular, I think. If a member has a question, we could pull you up, or Ms. Semino, or exactly. So if members have questions. So, okay, members of that, we're going to close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, the bill's been moved by Representative Bear. Second by Representative Byron. Okay, I'm going to get to the beginning of this bill. Again, if there's any other questions as we go through, committee members, feel free. I think we can open up and bring folks back up if you have questions as we go through. And I'm just going to go through this bill page by page. And if you have any amendments or any suggestions or questions, we'll work through this. So page 1 of the bill, of course, and then we're going to flip over to page 2 and 3. You can see these definitions. Start. Okay, and then is any questions or suggestions for amendments? And then I'm going to flip over to page 4 and page 5 I have now in front of me. Okay, page 6 and page 7. Okay, page 8 and page 9. We had questions earlier about the payment and those kind of things and mobile crisis teams. Okay, flipping over to page 10 and 11. You can see the trust is established here. And this, you know, there's words in there I just want to point out to the committee that on the top of page 11, lines 1 and 2, deposited within the trust fund account are intended to be inviolate. Now, that's nice legislative language that does, you know, it doesn't mean much. And the Constitution is the only path for an inviolate fund. And we have that with the permanent mill trust fund, the common school account, and then as the people of Wyoming amended the Constitution to allow a couple different areas, but particularly through higher education trust funds. And so we now have 2 established, which is, of course, the Hathaway and the Wyoming's Tomorrow. This is not an inviolate trust, similar to the Wildlife Trust Fund, which has $187 million now. We put $70 million in it last year to try to fill that thing up to our goal of $200 million in that. It is not permanent. There could be a future legislature, or maybe someday you don't need the Wildlife Trust Fund. And same with this fund, just so everybody, even though that language is in there, it's kind of a legislative intent. Okay, so I'm going to flip over. Good question, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think you're probably the right person to ask these kind of questions. So I assume that this fund will be in the pool fund, so it'll be a lower interest rate. Do you have an idea of what that interest rate would be compared to maybe one of the reserve accounts, which we've been discussing, creating a more inviolate reserve account in some of these other parts of our finances?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And we've also established a mechanism called Pool A. And we've passed that through the Constitution, where now by vote of the legislature, we can designate this account to go into Pool A, where it can be invested similar to the permanent mill trust fund for long-term returns. I would like the Wildlife Trust Fund, like the Tobacco Trust Fund, like the Cultural Trust Fund, the Cable TV Trust Fund, or the Public TV Trust Fund, the Game and Fisheries Trust Fund. All those are in Pool A, and some of them are small. I think it's 3 million is in the Public TV Trust Fund. So all those are in there and invested by our Treasurer's Office investment team there for a higher rate of return. So it would not just be dividends and interest, although that is rising, as we know. But yeah, that's a great question. Okay, any other questions on page 10 and 11? Okay, I'm gonna flip, and I have a blank page in here, but it flips over to 12 and 13 now. Are there any questions or any comments or thoughts, amendments on 12 or 13? I'm gonna flip to 14 and 15. Okay. And really, I think the part of this that has generated a lot of conversation is really section 3, the appropriation. And we talked, I think earlier, I mean, you could pass a 50-cent phone line tax to pay for it. We could just simply say it's a general fund issue and it'll ride in the general fund like the rest of the priorities. Or this approach to really save money, to produce money. So like we've done with Wildlife Trust and others. And so anyway, and who knows how this will come through the legislature or even this committee, but that's the approach the interim committee took to, as we have this one-time money, we've gotten pretty good in Wyoming, saving for the future like this. It's really quite incredible what we've been able to do. But so that's really, I think, as there members, that's the bill, and there is a section 4, and it's effective immediately. And are there any amendments then to this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to attempt to make an amendment, and I think people heard me earlier talk about the millions of dollars that the Biden administration is pouring into this program, which I think is hopeful for the future of this program. It was mentioned that we had received $250,000 of one-time funds, which looked to me like that would have come out of the $24 million that was previously appropriated from the administration. So with an 18-fold increase, it looks to me like it's going to produce somewhere around $6 million, $4.5 to $6 million for the state of Wyoming. So I'd like to make an amendment to strike on page 15, lines 11, 12, and 13, and make this hold off until at least a couple years down the road before we start creating the trust fund. I think that'll affect language elsewhere where we create the trust fund as well, but just want to offer that amendment.
You bet. So just to not delete all of section 3, but just lines 11, 12, and 13?
Yes, keep the 6 million in there because I think that, as I understand it, that is funding where we're at today. Would that be an accurate statement?
Everybody understand the amendment? Is there a second? Is there a second to the amendment? Okay.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay, second for discussion. Okay, members, discussion on the amendment. Does everybody understand? Did you get, Ms. Jeffrey, did you get the amendment? You've got it. Very good.
I do think that if this passes,
ahead,
we will have to make other amendments based on the.
There'll be some conforming with LSO, throughout the bill on that, but you bet, absolutely, we can do that. We've got the concept, absolutely. Okay, any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Storr.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the sentiments of those who have lost loved ones who came to testify today. I mean, it's hard for all of us to hear this. And it's really difficult to think that a stranger on the end of the phone line could make a difference when either you or your loved ones were unable to do so. I also appreciate the sentiment that private philanthropy can somehow fill this hole. But as we've heard, nonprofits and philanthropy is actually part of what's making this work. My day job is working in philanthropy, and I know that here in Wyoming especially, dollars are extremely limited. And the importance of having long-term funding clearly is something that we've heard from many people today, and making sure that it's stable, especially at times when there is economic crisis in the state and people are feeling that hurt. We've also heard that, we need, part of what this is bringing professionals and people who have training. In my county, in Teton County, like many other counties, we have a sheriff and a 911 dispatch center. But we also have an amazing set of volunteers who serve as Teton County Search and Rescue. And you'd be surprised at all the crazy things that people in Teton County, the trouble they manage to get themselves into. Like our programs there, I think this program will need both the public and the private sector working together to have an impact. And this is really just one of the tools in the toolbox. But as we've heard from almost everyone today, service providers, businesses, associations, it's an important tool. It is, and I've watched the legislature for years, and it's not often that I have seen so many organizations and industry come together to support something. And I know that a lot of people have worked hard on this. I guess I'd also just say if the supposition is that government doesn't have a role to play in improving people's lives in Wyoming and supporting the common good, in making a difference, and even in saving a life, as happens quite often in my county, then we should all just go home now. We had a lot of training last week and some really great inspiration from our leaders in the House. And I guess the one thing that I've been thinking about since then is the majority floor leader's comment that we're here to serve all the people. And in this case, I think that means the people who can't speak up or won't speak up. And I think that's who we're really trying to serve here today. So I'll just say that I'm weighing in on and against the amendment. Thank you.
Members, go ahead, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to speak in favor of the amendment because I do think there may be some other opportunities to get additional funding brought in. I certainly don't diminish the importance of the services provided, of course. But I do think we should pursue some of the opportunities for funding through some of these additional government funds that could potentially be available. And so I speak in favor of the amendment to strike those lines for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Comments on the amendment? On the amendment? Seeing no further comments on the amendment, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Why don't we just raise hands? Because go ahead and raise your hand if you're in favor of the amendment. We have 3. Those opposed, raise your hand. Okay, do we have any vote by Representative Northrop?
I vote no on the amendment.
Okay, so that amendment has failed. Okay, any other amendments, members? Okay. Okay, so members, no further amendments. We're at that point then to call a question on the bill, and we'll just have the roll call vote. So Ms. Jeffrey, this is on House Bill 65. Please call the roll.
All right. Representative Bear,
No.
Representative Byron,
Yes.
Representative Locke.
No.
Representative Northrop, we already have him as no.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, aye. Oh, that was the amendment, I'm sorry. Representative aye. Thank you. Representative Oakley, we have absentee votes for her. And thank you. Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Strock,
No.
Representative Swanitzer,
Let the absentee go to aye.
and Chairman Harshman. We have 6 ayes and 3 noes.
So as we adjourn the meeting here in a moment, but I just want to again, first of all, thank the committee for all your good work today. And I really, it's the beauty of this process. There's a lot of A lot of real stories here today that we're really appreciative of. And I'm just appreciative of all of you. So again, thanks for hanging in there with us. Our first meeting, we'll keep knocking the dust off and get more and more efficient, but it's a very tough issue, and how we pay for things. That's a big thing, how we decide to do this. I think but as we move forward, we'll continue the discussion. So thank you all for coming, and the meeting is adjourned.